At 14 hours and 7 minutes on August 9th, 2025, a Chinese naval corvette was less than 8 minutes away from firing on an American cruise ship carrying 2,000 civilians. In those 8 minutes, no declarations would be made and no diplomats would intervene. But targeting systems would lock, warnings would escalate, and a single decision would spiral beyond control. When it was over, people would be dead, a ship would burn, and two nuclear powers would stand at the edge of something neither wanted. The Pacific Jewel was never meant to be part of history. The Jinan had never meant to cause it. But exhaustion, pressure, and proximity made certainty out of fear. Both ships were in the contested blue expanse east of the Spratly Islands. Both believed they were defending legitimate interests. Both were certain the other would back down. Neither understood that 8 minutes was already too late. And it all started on an afternoon that looked perfect. The strike. At 14 hours, 7 minutes and 41 seconds, a warning shot from the Jinan's 76mm naval gun passed 23 meters ahead of the Pacific Jewel's bow. The shell struck the water with a fountain of white spray visible from both bridges. The sound, a sharp crack, followed by the delayed boom of the gun itself, sent hundreds of passengers running from the outer decks in confusion and terror. 17 seconds later, the second round was not a warning. The shell struck the Pacific Jewel's forward superstructure, punching through the observation lounge on Deck 11 and detonating inside. The explosion ripped through interior walls, shattered floor-to-ceiling windows, and sent shrapnel through 3 adjacent compartments. 7 people died instantly. A retired school teacher from Oregon, a grandmother celebrating her 75th birthday, a father of 3 who had been taking photos of the islands. Dozens more were wounded by flying glass, metal fragments, and the concussive force that turned furniture into projectiles. Passengers who had been photographing turquoise water moments before now lay bleeding on carpet that had caught fire from ignited upholstery. The ship's fire suppression systems activated immediately. Sprinklers drenched the affected areas. Crew members grabbed extinguishers and began battling flames that threatened to spread through ventilation systems. Smoke billowed from the gaping wound in the ship's profile, a black column visible for miles across the blue water. The Pacific Jewel shuddered but maintained way. Her captain, stunned by what had just occurred, immediately ordered a distress signal on all frequencies and began emergency evasive maneuvers, turning the massive vessel as sharply as physics would allow. On the Jinan, there was a moment of terrible silence on the bridge. What they had framed as enforcement had, in an instant, become an international incident. The corvette had just opened fire on a civilian vessel, and people were dead. Both ships were still afloat. But everything had changed the first hour. In the immediate aftermath, the Pacific Jewel transformed from vacation resort to disaster zone. Crew members trained for this exact nightmare moved with practiced urgency. Passengers were directed away from damaged sections and assembled in designated safe areas. The main theater, the casino floor, the largest dining hall. The ship's medical center, designed to handle seasickness and minor injuries, was overwhelmed within minutes. Doctors and nurses set up triage stations. They worked with what they had. Suture kits, meant for small cuts now closing shrapnel wounds. Bandages meant for scraped knees, now packed into penetrating injuries. Passengers with military or emergency medical backgrounds identified themselves. A retired Army combat medic from the First Gulf War. A former paramedic who'd worked urban trauma. A nurse who had spent 20 years in emergency rooms. They stepped forward without hesitation, moving between the wounded with steady hands, despite the chaos around them. The dead were covered with white tablecloths and moved to a makeshift morgue in a service corridor. The dying received what comfort could be given. Hands held, prayers whispered, morphine administered. The injured were stabilized, catalogued by severity, and prepared for evacuation that everyone prayed was coming soon. Radio calls went out on every frequency. Mayday, mayday, mayday. American civilian cruise ship under attack. Position transmitted. Casualties confirmed, requesting immediate assistance. Within 38 minutes, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft was overhead, relaying real-time imagery back to the 7th Fleet Command Center. Not long after, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer altered course at flank speed, cutting through the water at maximum power. Helicopters were already being prepped with medical teams and equipment. On the Jinan, the reality of what they'd done was setting in. They had not meant to kill civilians. They had meant to enforce what they believed was Chinese territorial water. They had meant to demonstrate resolve and compel compliance. But intent and outcome were now catastrophically divergent. The question everyone was asking wasn't what happened. That was documented on dozens of passenger phones and both ships' systems. The question was, how did it get to this point? And if you're into real-world military stories like this, make sure to subscribe for more. 48 hours earlier, the Pacific Jewel had departed Singapore 2 days before with a route that would take her through some of the most beautiful and contested waters in the world. The itinerary promised coral reefs, pristine beaches, and the adventure of navigating through the South China Sea's scattered archipelagos. The passengers were families on summer vacation, retirees fulfilling bucket list dreams, honeymooners seeking exotic destinations, and adventure tourists with cameras and curiosity. They came from 17 countries. They ranged from infants to octogenarians. Most had no idea that the route their vacation took them through was the subject of territorial disputes involving 6 nations and active patrol operations by multiple navies. The Pacific Jewel's captain did know. He'd sailed these waters for 15 years. His navigation plan carefully threaded through international shipping lanes, staying clear of the most sensitive zones, while still offering passengers views of the exotic island chains they'd paid to see. The ship's automatic identification system broadcasted continuously: Pacific Jewel, passenger vessel, United States flag, published route, non-military traffic. Under international maritime law, she had every right to be there. Under the laws of the sea, civilian vessels in international waters were protected from interference. But laws written in conference rooms don't always hold weight in contested waters where national pride, security concerns, and strategic positioning collide. For China, the South China Sea was not international water. It was historic territory, marked by the 9-dash line that appeared on their maps and in their military doctrine. Islands had been built from coral reefs, military bases established with runways and radar installations, patrol zones declared and enforced. And recently, after a series of incidents involving vessels they suspected of intelligence gathering disguised as civilian traffic, the tolerance for innocent passage had evaporated. The Jinan had been on patrol for 6 days straight. Her crew was tired, running on coffee and adrenaline. Her captain was under pressure from superiors who wanted results and demonstrations of control. And her orders were explicit: no foreign vessels in designated zones without proper clearance, challenge every contact, verify nothing by assumption, enforce boundaries. When the Pacific Jewel appeared on their radar, it wasn't seen as a family vacation. It was seen as a potential violation. 2 realities. On the Pacific Jewel, the afternoon of August 9th began like every other day at sea. Buffet lunch featured international cuisine and fresh fruit. Poolside trivia had retirees competing over movie quotes and historical facts. Children splashed in shallow water under a tropical sun, while parents relaxed with drinks decorated with tiny umbrellas. The ship's entertainment director was planning the evening show, a Broadway revue with singers and dancers. The galley was preparing dinner service for 2,000 hungry guests. The bridge crew monitored their systems with routine proficiency. Course steady at 90 degrees. Speed maintained at 16 knots. AIS broadcasting continuously. Weather clear with light winds. Visibility excellent. Everything nominal. Just another day in paradise. when the Jinan first appeared on radar at a distance of 18 nautical miles. It registered as exactly what it was, a naval vessel, not unusual in these waters. Professional navies and commercial shipping coexisted here constantly. The captain noted it in the log and continued monitoring. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about. But on the Jinan, the same contact triggered something very different. The Pacific Jewel appeared on their radar as a large surface contact following a course that would take it directly through what Chinese authorities had recently designated as a restricted patrol zone. Intelligence briefings from the previous week had specifically warned of suspected reconnaissance vessels disguised as commercial traffic, and the briefings had specifically mentioned cruise ships with routes designed to collect electronic intelligence near Chinese military installations. The Jinan's automated systems flagged the contact for closer examination. The AIS data showed a civilian passenger ship, yes, but recent training had emphasized that such data could be spoofed by sophisticated operators. The course showed a typical cruise route, yes, but it passed suspiciously close to features China had militarized with sensors and weapons. The Jinan's crew had been briefed just 72 hours earlier on new protocols, following what Chinese military intelligence claimed was a confirmed case of a civilian vessel conducting surveillance operations. The message from command had been crystal clear. Verify everything. Trust nothing. Enforce boundaries without hesitation. To the Pacific Jewel, they were on vacation in international waters. To the Jinan, they were a potential threat in Chinese territory. Same ocean, different maps, different realities. The escalation. First contact came at 14 hours, 32 minutes. The Jinan transmitted on the international hailing frequency in English. Unknown vessel, bearing 165 at 15 miles, this is Chinese Navy warship. You are entering restricted waters. Alter course to 090 immediately, or stop engines and prepare for inspection. On the Pacific Jewel's bridge, the captain and his officers exchanged confused looks. Restricted waters? They were in international shipping lanes, following a published route that had been filed with maritime authorities weeks in advance. The captain responded calmly and professionally. Chinese warship. This is motor vessel Pacific Jewel, United States flag civilian passenger cruise ship with 2,000 persons on board. We are transiting international waters on our published commercial route. Our AIS is broadcasting our identity and intentions. We pose no threat and request you maintain safe passing distance per international maritime regulations. 40 seconds of silence. Then the reply came, stern and unyielding. Pacific Jewel, you are in Chinese territorial waters. You will stop engines immediately and prepare for boarding, or you will be forced to comply. This is your only warning. The captain checked his navigation, charts again, running his finger along their plotted course. They were 25 nautical miles from the nearest land feature well, outside any legitimate territorial claim under international law. This was international water, by every recognized standard, except China's expansive and disputed claims. He responded more firmly this time. Chinese warship, we do not recognize your territorial claim in this location. We are exercising freedom of navigation in international waters as recognized by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We are a civilian vessel carrying families and children. We are not a military or government vessel. We respectfully request you do not interfere with our lawful passage. On the Jinan, this response confirmed every suspicion. A legitimate civilian vessel, they reasoned, would not argue about territorial claims or cite international law. It would not invoke freedom of navigation, a phrase that had become associated with U.S. military vessels deliberately challenging Chinese authority in what China considered its waters. This sounded like a scripted response from a crew trained to resist inspection. The distance closed steadily. 12 nautical miles, 10 miles, 8 miles. The Jinan altered course to intercept, her bow turning to cut across the Pacific Jewel's projected path. The Pacific Jewel's captain faced an impossible choice. If he stopped, he was submitting to what he firmly believed was an illegal boarding of an American civilian ship in international waters. If he didn't stop, he was refusing a direct order from an armed warship that was clearly willing to enforce compliance by force. He chose what maritime law and his own conscience told him was right. He maintained course and speed. But he also increased vigilance and broadcast a priority message to U.S. military authorities. American cruise ship being threatened by Chinese warship in international waters. Position attached. Request guidance and support. That decision, legally sound and morally defensible by every standard he knew, sealed what came next. The geometry of disaster. At 14 hours and 6 minutes, the Jinan had closed to 4 nautical miles. Her captain, interpreting the cruise ship's refusal to stop as confirmation of hostile or deceptive intent, authorized what Chinese naval doctrine called a warning pass, a high-speed approach designed to demonstrate resolve and force compliance through intimidation. It was a tactic that had worked effectively before on fishing trawlers, smuggling boats, and small cargo ships. But the Pacific Jewel wasn't a small vessel. At 90,000 tons displacement and 290 meters from bow to stern, she had momentum that couldn't be quickly altered. Even with engines reversed and rudder hard over, she would require miles of ocean and long minutes of time to stop or turn significantly. The Jinan came in fast 30 knots crossing directly in front of the Pacific Jewel's bow at a distance that civilian maritime regulations would call recklessly dangerous. The corvette's wake, churned up by her high-speed passage, rocked the massive cruise ship. Passengers on the outer decks screamed and grabbed railings. Deck chairs slid. Glassware shattered in outdoor bars. On the Jinan's bridge, officers watched their screens and waited for the cruise ship to slow or alter course. It didn't. The Pacific Jewel maintained her heading. From the Chinese perspective, this was deliberate defiance final confirmation that the vessel was not what it claimed to be. On the Pacific Jewel, the captain had already begun evasive maneuvers, but the ship's massive size meant her response lagged dangerously behind the urgency of the situation. He ordered an emergency announcement over the ship-wide public address system. Attention, all passengers and crew. This is the captain. Move inside immediately and away from all windows. Proceed to interior corridors and public spaces. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Families abandoned lunch plates mid-bite. Children were grabbed from pools, still dripping and confused. Elderly passengers struggled to move quickly through suddenly crowded corridors. Confusion and fear spread like fire as crew members tried desperately to move thousands of people to interior spaces without causing a deadly stampede. The Jinan circled back aggressively, positioning herself directly ahead of the Pacific Jewel at a distance of 3,000 meters. One final warning crackled over the radio. Stop engines now, or we will disable your vessel. You have 30 seconds to comply. The captain of the Pacific Jewel knew exactly what disable meant. It meant weapons. It meant his ship and his passengers were seconds from being fired upon. He immediately ordered all engines to emergency stop and turned on every deck light, radio beacon, and visual signal the ship had desperate visual confirmation that they were complying with the order. But on massive ships, stopping isn't instantaneous. The Pacific Jewel continued forward on sheer momentum, her enormous bulk carrying her closer to the Jinan, even as her engines reversed, thrust, and fought against her forward motion. On the Jinan's bridge, the watch officer saw a ship that appeared to still be approaching despite the direct order to stop. In the fog of pressure, 72 hours without proper rest, and operational expectations that assumed non-compliance meant hostility, that forward movement looked like aggression, or stupidity, or final confirmation of everything they'd suspected. The captain of the Jinan made his decision in that moment, not to sink the ship that was never the intent, never the order, but to enforce compliance with a shot that would disable propulsion or steering, but not destroy the vessel or cause mass casualties. A warning that could not be misunderstood or ignored. 7 people were dead. Dozens more bore injuries that would affect them for life. A cruise ship bore a gaping wound in her structure. And 2 countries that were already locked in strategic competition now had civilian blood in the water between them. The cost beyond bodies. The families of the 7 dead received formal written apologies from both the United States and Chinese governments, carefully worded statements that meant everything and nothing simultaneously. Financial compensation was negotiated through months of tense discussions, argued over by lawyers and diplomats, and eventually paid through intermediary accounts. No amount would ever be enough. No check could buy back a grandmother's last years or a father's presence at his children's graduations. The injured faced surgeries, long rehabilitation, and psychological trauma that would echo through years and decades. Many would never fully recover their previous quality of life. Several would never set foot on a ship again, their love of the ocean permanently destroyed. Children who had watched people die in sudden violence would carry those images into adulthood, triggering nightmares and anxiety attacks for years to come. The Pacific Jewel herself was repaired at enormous cost, hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild the damaged sections, replace destroyed systems, and restore her to seaworthiness. She eventually returned to service under a different route structure, but bookings dropped precipitously. Passengers deliberately avoided South China Sea itineraries. Insurance rates for vessels operating in contested waters skyrocketed. The cruise line never fully recovered its reputation for safety. The Jinan's captain was quietly reassigned to a shore position with no official explanation. The specific rules of engagement that had authorized the shot were reviewed, revised, and classified at higher levels. But no public admission of error was made. National pride and strategic positioning wouldn't allow any appearance of weakness or mistake. The diplomatic fallout was measured in canceled bilateral meetings, suspended cooperation agreements, and visibly heightened military presence throughout the region. Naval patrols increased on both sides. Rhetoric hardened in official statements. The South China Sea, already one of the world's most tense maritime regions, became measurably more dangerous for everyone operating there. The ocean is vast and peace fragile. Incidents like this remind us how close the world can come to disaster in just 8 minutes. What do you think? Was it a tragic mistake? Or an inevitable consequence of rising tensions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown powerful, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story where history almost changed forever.